President. Mr. President, 2 days before the tragic shooting in Santa Fe that has rightly dominated the news for the last several days, Texas experienced another mass shooting when a man killed his 3 children, his ex-wife's boyfriend, and himself. Mass shootings are generally characterized as incidences where 4 or more people are shot at one time. That is a catastrophic event for a community to have 4 people shot at one instance. That shooting, 2 days before the Santa Fe school shooting, was the 100th mass shooting in the United States of America in 2018. We average about a mass shooting every single day in this country. In the 3 days following the Santa Fe High School shooting, there were around 88 gun deaths and 222 gun injuries in this country. That's a big number. It's the most in any 72-hour span so far in 2018. Rightly, our attention has been directed towards the community of Santa Fe as they try to recover from the unrecoverable, another targeting of children in a school in this country. But it's important to remind ourselves that no matter whether the shooting happens on a street corner, in a school, in a movie theater, or in one's home, the devastation to those that lose their brother or their sister or their husband or their wife, it's no less or no greater, whatever the circumstances may be. And in the 3 days after Santa Fe, as the country could have been deluded into thinking that that was the only shooting of any consequence in the country, 88 people lost their lives from guns and 222 others were shot and survived. Part of the 33,000 a year, 2,800 a month, and 93 on average a day that are killed by guns in this country. It's a mix of suicides and accidental shootings, domestic violence incidences, mass shootings, and homicides. But there's no other country in the world in which this number is this big. There have been 5,531 deaths from gun violence in 2018 alone. That's according to Gun Violence Archive. 1,200 kids have been killed or injured, and we're not even halfway through the year. Our rate of gun violence in this country is 20 times higher than all of our other competitor OECD nations. And it's not because our schools are less safe. It's not because we have more incidences of mental illness. It's not because we have more troubled young men. It's not because we spend less money on law enforcement. You control for all of the other factors that people claim to be the reason for these crimes, and it does not explain why this epidemic is happening here and nowhere else. What is different about the United States is that we have the loosest, laxest gun laws in the nation. What is different about the United States is that shooting after shooting, killing after killing, we do nothing. We do nothing of substance or significance to condemn or change this trajectory of violence. And I will argue to you that would-be shooters who are contemplating acts of mass violence, who clearly have had something go wrong in their mind to consider such a thing, see our silence as a green light. Now, of course, we don't mean it that way. But when we refuse to do anything other than minor tweaks to federal gun laws year after year, young men that are contemplating doing something like this, seeing no substantial condemnation or change in law, pervert that silence into permission. I think that's what's happening today. And that's why I argue that we have become complicit in these murders, whether we think we are or not. So we're grieving hard for Santa Fe, but we're grieving hard for all of the other victims I sat with the president at the White House a few months ago, and as he told us that he was going to fix this problem, he was lying. He wasn't telling the truth. He had no intention of fixing the problem. The president had the gun lobby in the next day, and all of a sudden the discussion evaporated. He talked a lot in that meeting about school safety and arming teachers, but it's important to note that Santa Fe High had adopted really aggressive measures to prevent a school shooting. They had resource officers that were armed, 2 of them. They had approved a plan to arm teachers, though they had not started to do so. They had gone through a very successful lockdown, won an award for that response. And so this is a school that thought they were ready, and they weren't. This has got to be about a conversation rooted in data. And the data will tell you that more guns doesn't solve this problem. That for every time a gun that you own is used in self-defense, there are 4 times that a privately owned gun is used in an unintentional shooting, 7 times that a privately owned gun is used in an assault or a murder, and 11 times that a gun is used in a suicide. So the data just doesn't back up the fact that more guns are going to solve this problem. But beyond the data, there are these faces, there are these people, there are these lives that were cut short. And so I want to spend the remaining few minutes telling you a few of their stories. I've tried to do that over the years, to come down and put a hole in the data and let you know who these people are that we have lost. On average, psychiatrists and mental health professionals tell us that when one person is killed by a gun, there are 20 other people who experience trauma or some level of trauma. So in Santa Fe, we think a lot today about Cynthia Tisdale. She was 63. She was a substitute teacher for children with special needs. She got married when she was 17 years old, and she took care of her ailing husband. He was very sick for 47 years. He said she was a good woman. She watched out for me. Her son said she loved to help children. She didn't have to do it. She did it because she loved it. Cynthia Tisdale is gone at 63. Sabika Sheikh was 17 years old, and unlike the others who were killed in that school, she didn't have any family in the United States. Santa Fe was her adopted community. She was staying with a family, and her family that she left behind, her adopted family in Texas, said, "We loved her, and she loved us." Adding that the root of our issues is love, because when people love each other, these kinds of things don't happen. Sabika dreamed one day of being a diplomat and working to empower women. She died at age 17. Christopher Jake Stone was 17 as well. He was the youngest of 3 siblings in Santa Fe. He and his siblings were known as the 3 Stones. His sister said being a brother was his best job. He was always there if somebody needed someone to listen or cheering up. Definitely the life of the party and one of the most understanding, open-minded kids I know. He had a lot of heart, she said in a Facebook message. 2 days later, just to give you a sense of the scope of this, Kimberly Phillips was in a parking lot at a Shell gas station in Chattanooga, Tennessee, when her ex-husband found her, shot her, and then killed himself afterwards. A murder-suicide, one of the thousands of domestic violence partner-on-partner incidences that happen in this country. One of her co-workers at the senior living community where she lived said, "Today I lost one of the most caring, loving caregivers I have ever had on my team. She loved the residents and took their care very seriously." She was 48 years old. The day before that, Sherelle Wheatley was walking home from feeding one of her neighbor's dogs in Dayton, Ohio. Her neighbor said that she did this all the time. She'd cook a lot, and she'd take all the scraps and bring it to feed the neighbor's dog. She was walking home, and she was shot, a bystander in a drive-by shooting. She was a mom, a grandmom, an aunt, an active member in her community, a volunteer at the local elementary school, a pillar of kindness. Her son, who is a quadriplegic, who relied on her care, said, "That was my mom, helping people, even at the moment she died. I loved her, she was my angel, she was my everything, and somebody snatched that away from me." Those are just 5 of the victims that died over a 2 or 3 day period of time. 33,000 a year, 2,800 a month, 93 a day, and we're doing nothing. I appreciate some of my colleagues working on a minor adjustment to our background checks laws earlier this year. I'm not saying that that is totally inconsequential, but it doesn't measure up to the moment. And what's wild is that we're the only ones that don't think we should do anything. I mean, Americans have woken up to what's happening, and they're desperate for us to change the laws. 97% of Americans think that we should pass universal background checks. By a 2-to-1 margin, people think that we should get these assault weapons, these military-style killing machines, off the streets. People support things like we did in Connecticut, requiring people to get local police permits before carrying a handgun. These aren't controversial outside of the United States Senate, because increasingly Americans have come to realize that no one is safe. In that heartbreaking video, a young woman, just, I think, hours after the shooting, was asked by a newscaster whether she found it hard to fathom that the school shooting had happened to her at her school. And to paraphrase her answer, she said, "No, I wasn't surprised. It happens everywhere, and I just figured it was a matter of time before it happened here." Nicole Hockley, who lost her son in Sandy Hook, says all the time that she never, ever expected to be one of these parents grieving the loss of a child. And she reminds everyone she talks to that you don't imagine that you will be in that situation either. But if you don't do something about it, if you don't stand up and speak truth to power, it might be you too. So, Mr. President, I will continue to come down to the floor and tell these stories, these voices of the victims that have been silenced through gun violence. And hopefully at some point we will wake up to the need for change. I yield the floor.